Right, welcome to Stuart Waiton. Thanks for joining us for a chat today about education. Stuart's from the Scottish Union for Education. Just tell us just briefly about the Scottish Union for Education.
Okay, set up just over a year ago. The strapline, as you can see behind me, education, not indoctrination. I'm a lecturer and I have concerns about declining educational standards. I have had for quite a number of years. And increasingly, my concerns in terms of politics and the world have been focused on what's happening in schools, because what's happening in schools is astonishing, really, in terms of the levels of indoctrination that's taken place, the politicization of education, the degeneration of it, and the I'm going to say amoralization, as if that's a word. We can make it up, but there's so much happening in schools that you have to be worried about, and it would be so easy, in many respects, to fix the problem. That I thought we needed some kind of union to set up, partly kicked off by people like yourself and others who had noticed what was happening with the sex education stuff, and people had started to demonstrate against it, and thought, well, okay, if people are prepared to have a go, then I might as well try and help them. So it's really for parents, teachers, academics, anybody who has got serious concerns about what's happening in education. And we plan to, so we're a campaign organisation for the public in Scotland.
Right, that's great. Yeah, we're very supportive of your work. There's excellent output in the Scottish Union for Education newsletter. I urge everyone to sign up to that. Right, we're going to talk about a few topics in our time together today. The first one, basically, I think you could make a case that in Scotland, if you're parents and you've got some kids in school, if you want to get a bit more money, if you can get your kids to be naughty enough, the state will start paying you. How far is that from the truth?
Yeah, so this relates to the sort of allowances you can get paid if your child is diagnosed with something like ADHD or other sort of personality disorders and so on. So this is something one of the Substack, the newsletter that we've got coming out this week, is going to kick this off, this subject, because there's a kind of comedy out aspect of it, as you suggest, that you could, if you were like a clever, manipulative parent, just encourage your kid to run around a lot and see if you could get some money out of it. But unfortunately, I don't think that's how it works. The way it works, I think, is that we now have a society that part of what's called a therapeutic culture that medicalizes more and more aspects of everyday life. And I mean, this will be interesting for you in particular, but not just you, but people who support the family party, because part of the argument around this is, as morality has declined, what has happened, and this has been happening and developing for 60, 70 years, what's happened is you've had a new kind of professional psychiatric diagnostic interpretation of humanity. In fact, there's a great little book called The Vanishing Adolescent by Edgar F. Friedenberg, written in 1960, when he's describing how teachers, so he said teachers are now kind of pretty rubbish. They're sort of, lower middle class, not very well educated themselves, but more particularly, they don't really believe in anything, and they don't believe in knowledge and the Enlightenment, and have a real sense of being cultured and the importance of education in the past and how to project that onto young people. They've lost that. And part of the problem with losing that is they've lost their sense of authority. They've lost moral authority. They've lost a kind of philosophical authority. And what they've started to do is fill schools up with therapists and third-party people. So either they come in or teachers get taught how to be therapists. So that's how and you always bang on about, the kind of restorative justice stuff, don't you, in terms of how, you kind of got to stroke the child's head until the child sort of realizes that, yes, I've done wrong and apologizes and everything's all right in the world. So I think this is what's happening, is that we are reinterpreting, not just at schools, but across our culture, everyday difficulties through a psychiatric and medicalized language. So what happens is you now ask 8-year-olds how they're feeling if you do a survey, and you can have tick boxes, or you could just leave it up to them, and they'll start talking about being depressed and being anxious and being stressed, because they've been essentially educated to understand themselves through these categories. And so it's not too long before, once they get into their teens or even earlier, you get professionals starting to come in and have a diagnostic attempt to understand the bad behavior of children, or the difficulties that they face, or they're upset, or they're anxious. And obviously some extreme cases exist where you do need some kind of intervention, but there's a huge number of kids now being put on kind of Ritalin type drugs, which I hadn't realized. This is essentially speed, right? And so you move from the kind of development of language interpretation, and then a kind of medicalized psychiatric development, and then children who are shy, who are awkward, who are whatever it is, start to be diagnosed, and hey presto, you get the number of additional support needs. 37%, I think, in Scotland now. 37% of children. Astonishing. Number of people, this was October last year, the month of October, the number of people in Scotland, not kids, but people, was 1 million on some sort of antidepressant. I was just talking to, in fact, Sebastian Montour, who's a bit of an expert on this. He'd hopefully be writing some stuff on this. And he's just saying that the point about antidepressants is they don't work. And there's more and more evidence that they don't work, because they don't actually anti your depression. They just null you, right? They nullify you. And when this is given to kids, it has the danger of an increased suicide risk. And it's actually on the packets that this is a potential increase of suicide risk. So yes, sorry, a long answer to your short, funny question. It's kind of not funny, and it's something that needs to be discussed and is not being discussed.
Yeah. With these diagnoses, when they're made, and then the parents become aware of them, and often I think these diagnoses, they include then a prescription of how this child needs to be treated in school. They need all sorts of special attention, special care, special treatment. And then you've got the teachers with their boisterous class of 30 or whatever, and a few of them have got these special prescriptions for how to be treated. And basically the school's creating for themselves as an impossible problem, an impossible logistical problem, to actually have to follow up on these things. And then inevitably the parents end up feeling, well, the school's not doing it properly. They're not caring properly for our child, but the school sort of created the problem of its own back. It's like a vicious cycle, a vicious circle you get into. I mean, where's that going to end?
It is. It really is. I mean, it's, again, there's a lot of, not a lot, but you come across kind of conspiracy theory explanations of why these things are happening. That this isn't a purposeful attempt to kind of control people and make a kind of passive. It's a bit like the Brave New World scenario of Soma. You get kind of drugs that they make you happy, so the world's happy, and then the world, the people in charge can just get on with what they're doing. But I don't think it is anything to do with that, really. I just think the starting problem is the loss of meaning and authority that exists in society. There's a great scene, a fantastic scene. People should look this up on YouTube. It's the I can't remember if I've mentioned this to you before. It's the Sopranos, and Tony Soprano and his wife have gone in to see the school because his boy, who's a little toe rag, he's just a spoilt little toe rag. That's what. There's no way around it. That's what he is, right? And he goes in to see the school because he's stolen some of the wine. Right, and it's a Catholic school, and he's talking to the priest, who's the headmaster of the school, and they're sitting there and they're slightly, the parents, they're slightly uncomfortable and apologetic. And Tony Soprano, he's a gangster, in case people don't know who the Sopranos are. So he's a gangster with his wife. And he says, "Oh, I'm sorry about that. I'll pay for the wine." And the priest says, "It's not about payment. This is the holy sacristy. This is an affront to our morals and our beliefs, and so on." And so Tony Soprano hangs his head, and then he said, "I'll hand you over to the child psychologist. He'll explain more." Right, and it's brilliantly shot, because the child psychologist is standing above the priest, right? He's the authority, right? And the priest, he gives him a kind of little moral lecture, but then he hands authority over the child psychologist, who then takes over from there and starts to talk in this garbled language about this and that, and the parents are sitting there, and he's basically describing to them that this is a problem of ADHD, that the son fidgets and the son does this, son does that. And in the end, this is in the second part, you see Tony Soprano, they come back and they basically just, Tony Soprano says, "So he fidgets, right? What's that?" It doesn't mean anything. And this guy was going to basically get his kid to be diagnosed with ADHD, right? And it's the problem. And you see a beautiful example of where you've got the kind of the morality of the church, where you should have a serious discussion about what the moral values are here and what the parents need to do and what the child needs to do. And he just gives in straight away and just hands over to the child psychologist. And I think that's basically what's happening. I think people who in the past, and head teachers and teachers who had a serious, strong, authoritative sense of their purpose in a school, would tell kids to behave. They would have a sense of personal authority and discipline, and they would know how to control a class and know what it means to inspire kids. And when kids had problems, they would know how to deal with them and challenge them, know when to be hard, know when to give a kind of moral lecture, and so on. And I think that's what's been replaced, so that it's not that kids have really changed massively, I don't think, or anything about the world. It's just when children push against authority, there's nothing there. The door just opens, and they walk through into a therapist's, and they just sit on the couch, and then from there, everything, what the kid's going to end up being labelled with. And of course, for a parent who's struggling, it's a way out, isn't it? Because you can say, no, it's not just that I'm struggling as a parent, or he's a bit of a bad kid or whatever, but he's got this. And it gives you a bit of an out, but it's got a devastating potential consequences for the long term. I mean, the number of people off work now are being diagnosed with stress and anxiety and so on is absolutely through the roof. In fact, Richie Sunak even said he's going to try and stop doctors letting people off work for stress and so on, because it's becoming such a problem for society in terms of work. Because there's so many people off work now with various sort of disorders, anxiety, stress, and so on.
Yeah. But one of the ways I look at this issue, which you might agree, you might not agree, that I would say generally, if you look at sort of typical masculine, feminine traits, that then the trend in society is the sort of more typically feminine approach is glorified, the more typically masculine approach is demonized. And in schools, I think this is very, very extreme. So the trend is within schools are trying to mother the children. The more typically sort of mother type, nurturing, caring, empathic sort of things, where maybe the more typically fatherly, challenging, like kick up the backside, who do you think you are? No, you can't do that. Just do as you're told. I mean, that's totally out of the window. So it's like a chronic imbalance, and it's so imbalanced that the other side of the scales, if you like, is not functioning at all. No one dares even begin to try and pull back in the other direction, because that shows that you're unenlightened, you're cruel, you don't really care about the children. And in Scotland in particular, it just feels like there's within the educational establishment, there's virtually no balancing force at all.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, you can see it when you go into the Scottish Parliament or listen to the Scottish Parliament. It's like when you listen to kind of this sort of 50, 55-year-old conservative men in the Scottish Parliament, and you can tell they've been trained how to talk, because they try and talk with a gentle, slightly hushed tone. I'm sorry to ask this question, and so on. This kind of thing. But what's interesting about what you say, and I agree with you, I think that's true. But I actually think what this new type of culture does is it undermines old-fashioned, if for want of a better term, masculine authority, but it undermines also old-fashioned feminine authority, because feminine authority would be about, being a bit more caring, a bit more loving, a bit more sensitive, a bit more listening. It would be much more of a kind of personal, sort of becoming slightly closer to the child, slightly more intimate, and so on. Whereas actually, neither happens, because it might appear to be more caring, but it's caring in a kind of therapeutic way, which is fake, right? And I don't mean all therapists are bad. I don't mean that. I don't think therapy is necessarily bad. I don't mean that either. But when it becomes, everything becomes therapeutic, there's something artificial about it, because it's like, have I had my training? And that you'll have teachers say, oh, I haven't had my training on haven't had my training on this. So it's not really a normal human spontaneous reaction developed by an authoritative adult. It's an adult who has been trained in correct think.
Yeah.
Understand how to manipulate the child and manage the child and govern the child and so on. So actually, it's even warped that dimension of authority and behavior.
So it's trained out of people every normal human reaction. Yeah. So the sort of irritation, or I think an important part of growing up is you learn what gets on people's nerves. Yeah. You learn what winds people. You learn what makes them.
You wrote a nice piece on this about anger and parents getting angry and so on, and I absolutely agreed with you. I think, sorry, I interrupted you.
I've forgotten I'd written that, actually. But
it's a nice point about. It was partly to do with smacking, but it was largely to do with being angry and being spontaneous. And actually, it's good for children to have real reactions from adults, not fake reactions, not constantly controlled and sanitized reactions, real reactions to understand the consequences of your behavior. That was your point. I completely and utterly agree with you. Absolutely agree with you.
I think the way the balance goes is if the adults are covering up all of their emotions, that just results in the children being freer and freer and less restrained in expressing their own and doing what
ironically, yes. It's not a good mix.
No. If we can move on to another thing, you mentioned something earlier on I wasn't familiar with. This is the big ideas philosophy of curriculum, which apparently is looming over the horizon. What's this all about?
Yeah, right. Okay, so this is Stuart Baird. So Stuart Baird does our teachers coordination. He's a teacher himself in Glasgow, and he looks at he's our expert really on the academic writings on schools and the curriculum and so on. And he's just started to see, right? So one of our concerns and one of our arguments is that what we need, schools should be about education. What does that mean? That means that it should be about the best that has ever been thought and said from the past being transferred to the next generation. And that should be the starting point for wanting to be a teacher, is there's a body of knowledge about humanity, human history, geography, the sciences, and so on, English literature, the beauty of art, and on and on. And there's this huge body of work, how a fantastic humanity has been, as well as the problems, the flaws, the dilemmas, the tragedies, and so on. Right? That is what education should teach. And the way it teaches that, it teaches it through subjects, geography, history, maths, English literature, and so on, right? And those subject specialisms are the way that knowledge has been carried. Now, basically, what's happened with the curriculum of excellence, I mean, you'll know better than me as an ex-teacher, that the framework for teaching is now, we've got a situation where schools are now concerned, secondary schools are now concerned that basically it's a lottery. What kids are getting taught in primary school is essentially a lottery. And then as it happens, what they get taught in secondary school is a lottery, because there's no sense of a clear curriculum. Not that you'd have to be excessively directive in terms of how teachers teach, but there should be a body of knowledge. So that's a problem. Now, the experts are now starting to realize that it is a problem. They are starting to realize that there is a problem of a lack of knowledge, right? You'd think they might spot this a bit sooner, but anyway, there's a lack of knowledge. Kids don't know very much. And I tell you, as a university lecturer, they seriously do not know very much. I mean, the most basic things, right? Especially about history and politics and things like that. Some of them haven't. If I say, do you know what communism is? Never heard of it. Not a clue. And on it goes, right? Watergate, no, nothing. So their knowledge is dreadful, and they're starting to realize this. So to address it, what it looks like they're going to do is develop this thing called big ideas, because they still can't just accept the idea that subjects are good, right? Because anything from the past can't be good, right? We know that in terms of their outlook. So they are going to change. It looks like they will try and change it and develop things around big ideas. Now, what I think this is going to mean is it's going to mean something like environmentalism is the big idea. And then they change the subjects to have, so you've got, how do you get environmentalism into English and into history and into geography and into every subject? So you try and think knowledge is important, but it's knowledge around their obsessions, right? And then you build the curriculum around that, right? So actually, it has the potential for destroying and degrading subject knowledge more than it's doing now, even though it's meant to be addressing the problem of knowledge. So that's what we think might be coming our way. How long it'll take to get into schools, I don't know. But anyway, that appears to be the plan.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like it fits with the sort of thinking. I sometimes have the feeling that the SQA are a bit of a dam in the way of this sort of movement. They've actually got a bit of sense and a bit of rigor there in the SQA. I mean, so much so that they're being shut down, aren't they, and that they're being replaced. And I think their crime has been to try and stand up to some degree, for rigorous academic qualifications. So they're going to be swept away by this tide. I mean, goodness knows what will happen when they're gone. But this idea of like subjects are bad, it all needs to be mushed together. And maybe I think it's nonsense. When you teach a subject, you're aware of when it's overlapping with other subjects, and you mention that. But the pupils themselves, they realize for themselves that, oh, hang on, yeah, that's what we did in that other subject as well. It's a bizarre obsession, and I think you're right. I think it is driven by whatever way it used to be. There must be a different way. I suppose subject, that's quite structured. So I guess that, they've got to try and break down that structure. But
yeah. Well, it's very interesting. You should, if you haven't got it, you should get. I mentioned this partly because we've got them coming. So Frank Furedi, who is my favorite sociologist, who does a lot of work similar to the stuff that we're interested in. We're doing an Eventbrite online event with him this month. So I'll be advertising that in the newsletter. So if people are interested in that, they should check it out. But he wrote a book called Wasted: Why Education Isn't Educating. And just the introduction, the first sort of 20, 30 pages, absolutely fascinating in terms of historically situating this in, he doesn't quite say this, but I'd sort of force it into his, is that in the 19th century, they were kind of losing confidence in the idea of human progress. And part of what happens is they start to think that, well, knowledge from the past isn't that useful, right? Because society changes all the time, right? Which is partly true. Capitalist society has a kind of, 30 years ago, I wouldn't imagine the world was like this. And in 30 years' time, it'll have changed fundamentally, which is not how old societies work. But capitalist society changes a lot. So they started to get this idea, this is the progressive educationists all the way back then, where they just started to say this old learning, this rote learning, this knowledge from the past and so on, really, we need to teach children how to think critically and imaginatively, not learn from the past. And so from all the way back there, you already started to get a kind of slight sneering at this idea of subject knowledge and past knowledge and knowledge from history and so on, and more kind of trying to ways how do we learning to learn, critical learning. And I mean at university I get this whole unit set up to try and imagine new ways of learning, new ways of teaching, flipped classboards and authentic learning, this type of learning and so on. And all the time it just takes us away from the purpose of education and the knowledge that children actually need to be able to. If you don't know anything, it's quite difficult to be a critical thinker,
When I was teaching, it'd be quite common to hear someone talk about, obviously we realize that children are not empty vessels who need filling up with knowledge. Obviously, none of us are that. And I used to sit there thinking, that's what I'm trying to do. Just a little snippet, a little story you might find helpful to have up your sleeve. One of my sons was studying the Second World War in primary school, and he made a Spitfire out of cardboard and wrote a letter from the point of view of an evacuee and all this sort of thing. When he finished it, he said to me, "Who won?"
Yeah.
One last thing, very, very quickly before we tie up. The educational maintenance allowance. Now, sure, it's, just for viewers, if you're not aware, this is a thing where if your family's on a low income and you stay on into fifth year and sixth year at school, I think it's £30 a week can be claimed that goes directly to the pupil. The idea being that it enables pupils to carry on at school who might not otherwise be able to do that. Do you have any views on that scheme?
This was introduced. They did a thing in England a long time ago about this, didn't they? About at least 10, 15. It may have even come out of New Labour, I think. I mean, it's the problem I see in Scotland, which isn't just in Scotland, but it's replicated more generally, is that people try to use things to resolve other problems. So, for example, if you're trying to force children to stay in school by paying them, why are you doing that? That would be my question. And is there anything else that they could be doing that is better, right? Could be doing in terms of work in their community or actual work? Is there a problem that we need to think about apprenticeships, youth apprenticeships? And again, it's a problem that I feel very frustrated by politicians nowadays, especially in Scotland, because they don't seem to take society seriously in terms of what's actually happening and what the problems are. Because the economy in Scotland, as far as I can see, is in a coma and is slowly wilting. And you get people like the Greens coming in saying essentially growth is a problem. Say, well, that's all right if you're a very comfortable middle-class person, but if you're not, that basically means you're going to live in poverty or relative poverty, and without any real prospect of good, serious jobs for working-class people. And that should be the focus, I mean, that should be the focus. How can we develop a new industrial strategy for Scotland that sees growth as the essence of solving problems rather than the problem? Mm-hmm. So that would be my spontaneous reaction to that. But what do you think about it?
Yeah, I agree with much of that. I think another line is, I'm slightly concerned of inducting school children into the concept that you get money from the state. So you've got a class. I mean, for example, in modern studies, the EMA, Educational Maintenance Allowance, that's on the curriculum. You have a lesson about it. So you've got children sitting there being taught about it as part of the higher course. And inevitably, the conversation will be, oh, who gets it? Half the class, oh, yeah, I get it. Another, what, you get £30 a month, the government? Yeah. Oh, you don't, because someone's just over the threshold. Someone's just under it. And yeah, and I just think inducting them into the concept that if you can just meet the criteria for the form, then you can get the money from the government. And then surely that would have quite a profound impact on someone's outlook and relationship with the state, maybe through the rest of their life. If they're so desperate, if they really think, there's families who are thinking we can't afford to have our child doing hires, we need them out working, we can't afford. then in that case, give a bit of money to the parents. Even if the parents are then going to give it to the kid as pocket money, that's a better ratio. Because the other thing it does as well is it gives children more independence from their parents. So they're thinking, I can stick 2 fingers up to my parents. Don't worry about it. I'm still getting my £30 a week. Whereas if your source of income while you're at school is your parents are giving you pocket money or whatever, then that's a bit different. So I think it's a shift in the balance of power as well, away from parents towards the young people. So there's serious questions about it.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be overly concerned because there's the relatively small amount of money for each individual. And I think my concern about schools and the shift of power balance, if you like, is much more the ethos of schools, which they talk about all the time. I mean, again, you'll know all about this, but it's the kind of the child-friendly, the child-centered. And you see this in the transgender talk and so on, the conversion therapy. There's a constant sense, well, not even a sense, it's quite explicit at times, constant sense and promotion of the idea that parents are actually a bit of a problem for their children. In fact, it's very interesting. The conversion therapy bill, I presume people know that'll be listening to this, conversion therapy, the idea that if you try and persuade your child that they're being gay isn't good, or that they're not transgender and so on, then that becomes a criminal offence. Absolutely remarkable potential development, which is still potential. And you read that, and I can't remember the exact details, but I think it's sort of point 45, paragraph 45 on page 35 or whatever on the document. And it says, we're not going to just arrest and criminalize parents for their views, right? That's not what's going to happen. And then it's got this really lovely bit, and it says, as long as you have a non-directive conversation, then you're fine. Right? And I thought, well, that's beautiful, because what they're describing here is a therapist. The same, as long as you're a therapist who just says, oh, tell us how you feel, and then that's it. No comeback from the parent, no assertion of authority. Then that's fine. But if you act like a normal human being, a normal parent, and you express your opinion and you say something that you think is right and wrong, then you're a criminal. Right? So they're essentially criminalizing authority, right? And criminalizing parental authority. Right? If you say to your child, actually, you are a girl, you will always be a girl. You might think you're one of 1,000 genders, but it's a fantasy. Right? That will be a criminal offense. And it's just a classic example of how they think about parents and authority and basic norms, and how the state is now, like a juggernaut piling in. And that's the kind of framework that's the school ethos, and that's where I see. So yeah, £30 a week or a month or whatever it is, it seems a bit odd, but if you want to look at how they're undermining the idea of childhood, adulthood, and authority, it's it's everywhere, really.
The conversion therapy document is quite a remarkable contradiction in it. It says this will not criminalize parental direction, but then it goes on to say, as long as it's non-directive. So you can give parental direction, but only non-directive direction. I mean, how these things get past various proofreaders or whatever.
I think I just spin round on my chair now. That's the only that must be the only way. You just go round and round and round and round. I mean, what other solution is there?
But the conversion therapy ban, just a bit of background from a political perspective. It was in the manifestos of the last Scottish election. In other words, every MSP who's in the Parliament was elected on a manifesto of introducing a conversion therapy ban. It was in the Conservative Party's manifesto. That they'll try to make out that they're dragging the heels about some aspects of it, but every MSP in there was elected on that manifesto. So it's going to happen. It is going to happen. The die is cast. It was cast on the whatever it was, 6th of May, 2021 at the election. So we'll see how that works out. Well, Stuart, as ever, that's been fascinating to discuss these things. Maybe a few more unusual issues, not the routine ones. So that was great. Thanks for us to take us some time out to discuss these things, and
no bother.
Hopefully speak again soon.
Cheers.